Hey everybody out there, hope you're having a wonderful day. Joined again today by another Mississippi artist, Adrienne Brown-David. So we're going to take a little pit stop in St. Louis, do a flyover on the Virgin Islands, and then end up back in a Mississippi ditch full of fairies and turtles, all of that right now. Great to be with y'all out there. Julian Rankin here with the Walter Anderson Museum of Art. As always, give the stream a share and let folks know what we're doing here. So I mentioned today we're joined by Adrienne Brown-David, who's an artist in Water Valley. In the intro there, that was Luther Dickinson, who plays at an annual concert at the museum in the Ocean Springs Community Center, so shout out to Luther. But right now, Adrienne, I'm pulling you in, and we're looking into your studio. So I guess first of all, give us a little bit of lay of the land. You know, how is your studio process go? Yeah, that is at home, correct?
Yeah, my studio actually is a little 10 by 10 room off of my kitchen, which you can see like right back there. And so I usually try and get up in the morning before all the people start bustling around the house and get in here for a couple of hours of quiet. Because I do not have a door, which means there's a constant in and out of children and laundry, because the laundry room is on the other side of the studio. It's sort of a thoroughfare in the house. But yeah, it's a tiny little space, but it works. It works for now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, during quarantine times, everybody's on top of each other, but even in normal times, part of making art is trying to find a space to do it in. So,
Right.
you know, to have a dedicated space is more than a lot of people have.
Yeah, this is the first time I've ever had an actual, like, legit studio. Before this, I worked in my living room, I worked in my garage, I worked at the dining room table, and so, like, it's really great to just have a space specifically for this. I mean, granted, it still has children in and out of it, but I don't have to move anything for people to eat dinner, so that's
Yep.
helpful.
And children, we're going to talk about your children and how they influence your process. But I wanted to reference your journey to Mississippi. So you're from St. Louis, grew up there, and spent a good bit of time after that in the Virgin Islands. And then you've been in Mississippi, I think, for about 11 years. So that's circuitous journey to Mississippi, those travels that you've had and places you've lived. You know, how has that made you think about your concept of home generally, and then, you know, this home that is now the home for you and your family here in Mississippi?
Well, my husband and I say a lot that there's two types of people in the world. There's farmers and there's hunter-gatherers. And like, so there are those people who live in a place, settle in that place, stay in that place forever. Those are your farmers. Like, they like where they are, they get situated. Then you have your people who are like, this place is great, but there's lots of great places. Like, I want to go see some other great places. And those are your hunter-gatherers. And we tend to lean more towards hunter-gatherer. Like, we have lived here longer than anywhere else, but not because we don't have the desire to be someplace else. This just is where we are right now. And so, like, we live our lives knowing that at any moment we could be like, yeah, I think I'm done here. let's move to a different space. And I really like that, like the freedom that comes with that. It's a little harder the more kids you have, but our kids are older now, and so it feels a little less like we need to be in one spot for a long period of time, because half of our kids are on the verge of adulthood. And so home really is just wherever we are at the time, wherever our family settles. And so that's Mississippi for right now.
I think when I first saw your work, I was up in Oxford. There's a great show, a one night only show at the Ole Miss Motel that's been going on for a few years, and it was a couple years ago, and you had a whole room at the motel full of art, which was the concept of the show. And at that time, I was drawn to your line work. You had those amazing cityscapes and houses.
Oh,
and Yep.
yeah.
So those are awesome, and you do a lot of different kind of things. I mean, you're a painter. We can see in your studio there's some portraits back there. And I was thinking about Walter Anderson when he famously would travel abroad. He had on his passport that his profession was decorator. You know, he was a muralist and all this, but he just thought of himself as a decorator and a guy who thought about aesthetics and who made things. When did you know you wanted to be a professional artist?
I've sort of always had art in my life. I've been drawing since I was little bitty, like preschool age. My grandmother used to keep like her paper grocery bags and the little cardboard that came out of like her pantyhose package for me to draw on when I was little. And so my family always really encouraged it. And so I never really thought of doing anything else. Like it just has always been a part of who I was. Like I was never a kid who was like, I'm going to be a paleontologist or I'm going to be an astronaut. Like I just always knew that I would create in some capacity, like for my entire life. And so I've had other jobs, but they've never, like if people were to ask me what it is that I did, I would always be like, oh, well, I'm an artist. Even when I was a teacher, even when I was, you know, an office manager at a hotel, like those were never a part of who I was or what I did. That was just how I made money. And so for me, there's never been a distinction between painting and what I do for a living. Like it's all just a mishmash of who I am. And so I can't really pinpoint a time where I was like, oh, I'm going to be a professional artist, because I've just always sort of been an artist just as a person.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. You were talking about hunter-gatherers. I know some entrepreneurs and artists who work for themselves, and it is a little bit of catch what you kill. You know, there's that element to it. But you do have dualities. I mean, we all do. You're also a mother of 4 girls, which 4 children, I can't imagine, but they seem all well-behaved, and they're also your inspiration, at least to some degree. Talk a bit about how they influence your work, and I know you homeschool 2 of them too, so you get to spend a lot of time with them.
Yeah, well, when I first had kids, my art looked very different. And so when I had children, I tried to keep moving in the direction that I had been moving with my art, and like separate from me being a mother, which was fine. It just was a lot harder. Like my practice had to look a lot different. I had to stop using certain materials for a while, because when you have a toddler, oil paint is not your best friend, because toddlers get into everything. And so things just started to be a little more challenging. And so for a while I had to sort of pull back from art as a focus, because my children are all like stairs. So I had little children back to back. And so once I could get back into actually really being able to practice and getting into the studio and getting into my sketchbooks and being able to paint, my focus shifted a little bit from the direction it was going prior to having children to my art focusing mainly on my children and what the world looks like for them and what this experience looks like for them. And so now my gallery work tends to focus mainly on my girls and using them as a representation of Black girlhood in the American South. I do a lot of other like commission stuff, and that's pretty, like you can see some behind me, like that's mostly just random people who want me to paint pictures of them. But like the work that I do for myself is probably 90% my children and their experiences living in Mississippi. Their childhoods are very different from my childhood and my husband's childhood. We both grew up in the city. Like we have city upbringing, we have city memories. Like we don't have grass, trees, birds, freedom, wide open spaces. Like those things aren't a part of our makeup as children. And so it's been really interesting to watch our girls grow up in a completely different environment and see how that shapes who they become as women and who they will eventually become as parents. Um, but to also still understand that despite the fact that their childhood looks very different environmentally, societally, their childhood is going to be very similar. Um, Black and brown children tend to be read as older, as less innocent, as, you know, more mature, and all these things. And none of those things are true. And we've experienced it. I've heard people say, "Oh, your kid, I didn't realize that she was only 7. I thought she was like 12." And people say it thinking it's some sort of compliment without understanding that what they're actually doing is squashing my small child's childhood. And so I've been using my work to sort of capture those moments of my kids just getting to be kids and just being kids in a situation where there's no outside influence, no one deciding what is good for them, what's mature enough for them, what's not mature enough for them. And so that's what a lot of my work recently has been about.
Yeah, and I love that idea of using nature and the landscapes of the American South to investigate that. And you also, because you're teaching them out in nature, you've got a certain connection between art and science. We're looking at a piece that has, you know, birds, and there's mushrooms, and in one of your daughter's feet is in it, and then you've got a quote or a scientific fact written on there. And I guess that seems to be an amalgamation of things you would have in your sketchbooks, right? You were telling me about teaching out in nature.
Since we homeschool, we sort of, you know, make our day look the way we want our day to look. And so I actually homeschooled all 4 of my kids, but my older 2, once they got to high school, were done with homeschooling. And so I'm down to just the 2 smaller ones. And so once a week, before all of the quarantine madness happened, we would spend a day in the woods. Our Thursdays were our forest school days, and we get up, eat breakfast, pack a lunch, get our forest school clothes on, and go and just spend Thursday in the woods. And it's the same little section of woods, and we've been going every week for probably 5 years, which means my youngest daughter, who's 11, has spent half of her life in this area in the woods. Like, she knows the birds, she knows the plants, she knows the bugs, she knows her way around like the back of her hand. I don't have to worry about her. Like, she's watched the land change and grow, and we recognize when our impact has become too much and we need to go to a different spot to let that spot heal from all of us being there all the time. And so those are things that she's picking up just as a part of her day-to-day life. And so because we do that so regularly, I kept a journal for a year of just observations that I had out in the woods, of birds that I saw, when I saw them, mushrooms that we foraged, and when things started to bloom, and what bugs we saw, and when things disappeared, and what the weather was like. And so all of those things became a record of just the environment over the course of a year. And so I'd been taking those and thinking about how fleeting all of those things are, like how quickly that bird is going to fly away, or how quickly that mushroom is going to shrivel and turn into something else. And thinking about how that connects to how quickly my girls are going to be go from being children to being women, and how quickly they're going to be perceived as women, whether they are women or not. And I thought that was a really interesting parallel. And so I'd been doing a lot of paintings of my girls in these environments and pairing those with drawings of the actual flora and fauna in those environments. And it's an interesting push and pull with the work. Like, they don't seem like they would go together, but once they're all put together, it makes a cohesive idea.
Yeah, I mean, I do think nature is a lens for us to think about so many different things. I mean, how we treat the environment illuminates how we treat each other in some ways.
Right.
Or, I mean, conversely, the love we have for certain creatures on the planet paradoxically reveals the way we don't express that empathy for other people that might be our neighbors and so forth. But I think, regardless of who you are, I think children in nature, it's such an important time to have them express that agency in the landscape and to venture out off the prescribed path. There's a great Rachel Carson quote. She wrote that if I had influence with the good fairy who's supposed to preside over the christening of all children, I should ask her to give each child in the world a sense of wonder so indestructible that it would last throughout life as an unfailing antidote against the boredom and disenfranchisement of later years. And I wonder, I wonder what you've seen from your girls who have had that opportunity. How has that been manifest?
My youngest, we say all the time, she is a child of the woods. Like, my other three are sort of getting to the point where they're older, they're interested in, other things, but because she has spent so much of her life just in it, like, she is of this place, she is of this earth, like, her roots are in the soil here. Like, this is such an integral part of who she is, and just watching her, like, just run through the wood, just be outside, running through things, climbing trees, picking stuff, having no fear of anything, and just having a sense of connectedness to the land and to the environment, and how that plays out in other things. We also say she is like our most political child. Like, she is the most, like, climate change and race relations and all of these things. And I feel like it's all a part of her just having the freedom to connect to the place where she lives and understand how all of those things work together and how all of those things are connected and how all of those things affect one another.
Yeah.
And so she's a really good teacher in a lot of ways, just watching her interact with the world and having discussions with her about the world and just looking at the way she thinks about things. And I feel like all of that is because of her connection to the earth.
Yeah. So you were one of several artists that we asked and invited to paint a Walter Anderson block print, and these were the large-scale block prints that Anderson made in the 1940s and that have been in circulation ever since. His family first made the block prints, and now they're screen printed. They were preserved in screens so that people could still collect them, and they do, of course. And so you chose one of the block prints that was from his Ditch series, and we're looking at it now. All it was when you got it was essentially lilac ink, very faint, and then what you did with it was just amazing. I mean, can you talk a bit about how you approached that piece?
Well, to be perfectly honest, when I first got the email about it, I had to Google who Walter Anderson was. Mm-hmm. Like, he just was not in my wheelhouse of artists. And so once I Googled him, I was like, oh, I recognize all of this work. I pretty much know everybody I know has one of these prints in their house somewhere. Like, all of my Mississippi friends have one of these in their house in some form or fashion. And so I was like, okay, I recognize this, and I recognize what this work feels like. And so what I wanted to do was take what the work felt like for me and translate it into what my work is, which is, an observation of nature and girlhood. And so I wanted to tie those two things together. And the first thing I thought of was, like, fairies. Like, what would a little fairy captured, like, in a moment, peeking from behind a flower or from under a leaf, or what would that look like to me? Like, what do I imagine that to look like? And so that's kind of the direction I wanted to go with that. And I really like playing with the idea of like the mythical and the realistic. And so the faces in my painting are actually my kids, uh, like taken from random photos of them actually out playing places. And so that's really how I wanted to play with it. Just like, what would this look like if I stumbled upon a little group of, flower fairies in the woods while hanging out with the kids? And so that's kind of the direction I wanted to go with that.
It's so evocative. I mean, I loved all the renditions that these artists gave us, and that one especially was just so striking. And I'll just tell the people out there, I mean, this piece is for sale to benefit both Adrienne and the museum. So if you're interested, just drop us a line or email me. My email's julian@walterandersonmuseum.org, and you can own this amazing piece. So we're going to conclude today with Pictionary, but I want to just turn it back to you before we have a little fun with that. And I guess just ask you, is there anything else you want to add about what it means to be a working artist in Mississippi, not just during this time, but just in general? Any kind of message for other creators out there, or just the general public about why art matters?
I think a lot of people think that if you're an artist, you need to live in a place like New York or LA or Chicago at the very least, which are great. I love Chicago, like I love New York, but Mississippi has really been a great foundation for my actual career as an artist. Like the last 2 or 3 years, I haven't had to work another job because people here love local artists enough for me to be able to sustain a lasting career just by painting. And so I feel like living in a small place and living in the South is underestimated a little bit. It's definitely a little harder. There's less opportunity for things, but because there's a smaller microcosm of artists and artistic endeavors, they are much easier to find. It's easier to create a foothold. It's easier to meet people. There's less who less what school did you go to, what degrees do you have, and more of who are you and what is this thing that you do, which is more my speed. I'm much better with, this is what I do, this is who I am, and that's more comfortable for me. And so I feel like Mississippi has been really great in that respect. I've met a lot of people just through hey, I saw you at the motel show. I saw you at the motel show. I know this person over here who has a gallery. Would you be interested? And so a lot of my work has spread like that. And I don't feel like that would happen if there was 40 million artists and 40 million galleries and everybody's competing and who's got. And so this is a much more laid back, much more my speed sort of art world, and I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. I've always felt like Mississippi in particular, that while we do have a lot of creativity, especially per capita, of course it's not New York in the sense that we have a smaller scale, everything is not as on top of each other, but that because that's the case, whether it's a cultural institution or just an artist or anybody who works in a creative field, that it means more perhaps, or means a great deal in Mississippi. And then also Mississippi, just like the American South as a whole, is this keystone and this cipher for American identity, because so much of, whether we're talking about the long arc of history, both the darkness and then also the brilliance of creative people and authors and musicians, and the Mississippi River itself, there's just so much here that lends itself to a larger conversation about what it means to be human.
Right.
Well,
I agree.
So let's use that as an unnatural segue to something that is completely frivolous and lighthearted. So we've done this once before, and just to introduce to the folks out there, we're going to play a round of Pictionary. There's no official time that I get to guess, but Adrienne, if you want to get set up, however you want to move your screen and pad of paper, you have prepared a topic of some sort, some kind of subject, and
I don't know. My 11-year-old here has a plan for.
So we've sourced something, and
now waiting for her cue.
All right, we're ready for you then. So whenever you're ready, here's the whisper.
Wait, what? Okay, I can do that.
All right, so I'm ready whenever you are.
Let's see if I can do this like this.
Oh man, that's skilled. All right, pressure's on. Okay, we got a bear.
No.
It's not a bear?
It is a bear.
Okay. All right. Is the bear going to be...
It's a specific bear.
Okay. It's not Winnie the Pooh, is it?
No.
Oh, great. I don't know my bears. One of the 3 bears? They didn't have names. Is it Teddy, whatever the Teddy, what's that bear?
Am I allowed to give hints?
Yeah, give me a hint, but don't tell me. What's the hint?
Okay. So my daughter does not know any specific bears except for species of bear.
Okay, gotcha. All right, is it a black bear?
It is a
black bear. That's so Mississippi.
Like, yeah, she doesn't know any of the, maybe Winnie the Pooh, but I don't think she knows any other bear characters.
No, I love that because that's more true to the actual, the species that she would be learning about in nature. And I wonder if she had any. I'm sure she's read Faulkner, so I'm sure she was actually just referencing. Faulkner's short story.
Not the black bears that were covering her sweatshirt. She ran out of here.
She was talking about Faulkner and Teddy Roosevelt all in one little gem.
She does know the Teddy Roosevelt reference though, so.
That's amazing. Well, Adrienne, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciated it, and I would encourage everybody out there to look you up, to check you out on Instagram and your website, and support artists. This is the time to be collecting work. So anything you want to tell people out there about the easiest way to find you? Would you recommend Instagram?
Yeah, Instagram's probably the easiest, and I'm Adrienne Michelle on Instagram. That's really the only place I am. I don't really do any other social media, so.
Awesome.
Yeah, check me out.
Well, tell the family hello. Y'all have a wonderful day, and I'll
you too.
See you next time.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Well, that was another episode of The Connect, where we connect you to interesting people, places, and ideas outside of your doors and all across the map. Joining us next time is another wonderful guest, and we won't tell you that right now because you have to tune back in. So if you don't already follow us, hopefully you're following us on Facebook if you're watching this, but if you don't, make sure you hit that like button and follow button. Same thing for Instagram. We're at Whamma Museum. And please stay well, be safe, be creative, and we'll see you next time.